No, it is easier.
Alright, let's have a quick conversation about these. Okay. So, what do you think is the most efficient method to determine these zeros?
Graph.
Graph it to get what? Well, can we get x-intercepts, the roots?
No.
No. So then, what's our next strategy? Vertex form, right? So we could get vertex form, 100%. And when you graph this, one thing I do want to remind you of when you graph this is there is actually an operation on the calculator that can perfectly tell you what your or what your vertex is. There we go. We're just focusing on that one. So what could I do? Like, I have the grid on there, so you can perfectly tell what the axis or the vertex is right now. But what can I do to get that vertex easily? Menu, then what? Analyze, and then minimum, right? There it is. There's my vertex. So, I see people writing the equation. This is something I saw in the homework again. And before you just jump into the equation, make notes to yourself. What is the vertex form? Y equals what? A. You got to know that equation. You got to. Now, I'm also going to write my notes from the graph. What do we know about the vertex? Anything? It's 1 and 1. And so the first one is my what from the equation? H. That one is a K. You good with that? H comma K is your vertex. By the way, I do want to make this quick note, because I saw this on the homework as well. Where would the axis of symmetry go on this graph? Up and down through the what? Through the vertex. That's the language I'm looking for. We got to recognize that it is a vertical line that goes through the vertex. So if you were to tell me the axis of symmetry is 1, that doesn't mean anything. I saw is what? X equals 1. A lot of us wrote and even made the note that, hey, x equals h is the axis of symmetry, and then we just wrote 1. No, that's a line. X equals 1. Remember, the whole point of it being this equation is, what I'm saying is it doesn't matter what the point is, the x value is always what? 1. Right? If I look at this point, that is 1 comma 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I look at this point, that is 1 comma negative 3. Okay? So the x value is 1, no matter what. That's why it's x equals h, the x value of the vertex. So hopefully that's a quick help. But we're trying to write this equation. And also don't forget, like I wrote out this vertex form, but what we're equal to is 0. From the beginning, we're equal to 0, correct? What is my a value? 1, right? You can pick a point on the graph and figure out what a is, but when I'm given the equation, I already know what a is, or one of the equations. Times x minus, what is my h? 1, and then squared plus 1. And Lexi's like, man, Mr. Kenny, it's so hard, it's freaking me out. Guys, it's 1s. Don't let that, yeah, cool. We got 1s. Alright? Now, from that vertex form, what can I do to solve this equation, to find my solutions? How would I solve it? What am I going to do? I'm going to what?
You're gonna get one of your plus 1.
Okay.
Subtract plus 1 on both sides.
So subtract 1, right? I saw people trying to take the square root right away. Can we take the square root right away? No. So we can't. Oops. I literally just said we can't do that. Subtract 1. -1 is equal to x minus 1 squared. Now, typically you have to write your a there, but because it's a 1, I don't have to write it, right? 1 times anything is just that anything. But if there was like a 2, I would have to now divide by 2. What can I do now to solve for x? Square root on both sides. So square root of -1 that we're all freaking out about, that is I, right? That's the whole point, and it's what? Plus or minus.
You can't just say or that.
We always just say plus or minus. Which, it would make sense, except remember what we're doing once we add that 1 to the other side is 1 plus I or 1 minus I. That's why we always say it's plus or minus. But that's not bad language. And don't forget, the whole point is that the square is the inverse of the square root, so they cancel. However, am I canceling anything here, LaShannon? No, right? The square root only cancels a square. Now what's my last step? Add 1. Okay? So x is equal to, and you can do it as plus or minus I plus 1, but remember we traditionally put our real part first and then our imaginary part.
I don't like how the plus and minus I.
I can't hear you. What'd you say?
The first one, I don't like how it was.
This one?
Yeah.
Don't write it like that. Write it like this.
That's how I write it.
Okay. So quick question. How can we check our solution? I saw some people say graph. Can we graph? Where do you see 1 plus or minus I on that graph? Oh, you can't. You can only use your graph when you have x-intercepts. But that's a solution to the original equation, is it not? Cameron, what do we mean by a solution? Well, guess what x is equal to, but come on, the solution to an equation. So if we substitute it in, this equation should equal 0, or the left-hand side should equal 0, meaning that we make this equation true. This is why I harped on that term solution so early in the year, because anytime you hear the word solution in math, you need to think, hey, that makes the equation true. So let's check it. So let's try 1 plus I, squared, minus 2 times 1 plus I, plus 2, equals 0. That's interesting. We're squaring that 1 plus I.
How you solve for I?
I'm not solving for I. I is a number to the square root of -1. That's all I ever is. What I am saying is, I'm squaring that 1 plus I. Is that what's freaking you out? What does it mean to square something?
What they gonna cross out?
No. No. I mean, maybe eventually, but you're forgetting the most fundamental thing. I'm squaring this. What does it mean to square? Multiply by itself. Because what property do I now need to use? I need to use the distributive property. You can't just do 1 plus I squared. You've got to distribute. 1 times 1 is 1 times I plus I. I times 1 plus I times I. Now I get my I squared. Don't forget to distribute here. Minus 2I plus 2. Okay? So I will point out I squared means we have the square root of -1 what? Squared. So the square root and the square cancel, so what does I squared become? No. It just becomes that -1. I plus I is 2I, minus 1, minus 2, minus 2I, plus 2. Remember that's supposed to equal 0. Now, let me clarify something. I'm showing you that you can check it this way. It's good to have this note. I'm not going to test you on this because it is brand new. Hey, but what is 2I minus 2I? 0. Right? 1 minus 1 minus 2 plus 2. What does that become? Does 0 equal 0? So is 1 plus I a solution? Yes. Right? It's a solution, it has to make the equation true. That's what we want to pull out of this. Okay? I want y'all to take about 10 to maybe 15 minutes to work on number 8 here, where you are using any method to determine the zeros of each function. Okay? You use any method you want, but what I will point out and remind you here is a lot of us jump straight to the vertex form because we couldn't use factored form. Was there any other method you could use to solve the quadratic equation? Quadratic formula, right? So you can also do that to check yourself. That is another way that you could have checked yourself, is you could have used a quadratic formula to check and make sure you get the same answer. If I were you, I would use the vertex form at least once, and I would use the quadratic formula at least once. So you get practice with both. Any questions? Let's get to work.
So since it's a square root of a square, it cancels out.
Does that make sense?
The hypothesis
That's what he's saying. Remember, the I squared, I itself, is the square root of -1. So I'm squaring the square root of -1. And what happens with a square root and a square? They cancel, so I'm left with -1, which is what is right there. Okay. So let's work on A, B, and C. Work within your groups, talk with each other to help each other get better at this.
Let's graph.
And then, wait, you can just delete that and put it in the equation then if you want. Yeah. You need to be careful. See how it says -b? What is your b right now? What I would do if I were you is I would take a second and I'll just say A, B, and C. What is A equal to? Remember, it's ax squared plus bx plus c, right? And technically, you need to make sure it's equal to 0, because you can't use that formula unless it's equal to 0. But because you're finding a 0, you need to substitute it. But a is negative. What is b? Notice that's a negative 8. So right here, when you do negative b, it'd be a negative and negative 8. That would change things significantly. But I would write this out to make sure you don't make that mistake, so that you see where it's coming from, right? Negative and b. So that's why I would take a second to write out my a, b, and c every single time. Does that make sense? As a quick hint, I will point out, I think A is the easiest one to use on vertex form on. Yes, sir. So it is, hey, really quickly, if I were you, I would graph all 3 of my equations to check to see which one the vertex is easy with and which one that's rough with, because only one of these equations has an easy vertex. Only one of these equations has an easy vertex, maybe. So I would just, don't forget, and like, this is what a lot of students are doing, you're just putting it into a calculator. Am I gonna be able to give you credit if you don't show me where this is coming from? So you need to write out the equation, but do that first. Stop jumping straight to the equation in the calculator, right?
That
So
one
there's
is the
that.
only one that's hard for me to remember. That's the
That
only one I
equation?
don't remember.
Yes.
Yeah, you got 2 days.
I missed.
We'll get some practice with it.
I missed when went over it, so.
But I would do that, and what I would do also is I would say A equals, and B equals, and C equals based on the equation. Does that make sense? But I would graph each of these to see if any of the other ones give you an easy vertex, because if the other 2 don't give you an easy vertex, you might want to use quadratic formula there.
But would that be right with negative then?
Nope, that's not the vertex.
So don't forget, if you're going to use a quadratic formula, you have to know this for this understanding check. Because You got a note in 2 days for the test. What's the issue?
I got quarterly of -2. So is that still I?
Well, it's not square root of -2, but remember we talked about, and that's why we did this the other day, that could be the square root of -1 times 2. Right, so it's square root of -1 times the square root of 2, so we write that as square root of 2i.
X equals negative.
Right, but again, that'd be plus or
B squared
minus, right?
minus 4.
Does that make sense?
And then
So yeah,
minus
you're not gonna,
2x.
notice how it says
Just
non-real
after
result,
you
because the
do it,
result's
because
going to be complex or imaginary.
Because when you solve it,
So
you
keep
have
working.
to like, I split mine up and then, like I make 1 plus and then 1 minus and then solve and I get 2 answers.
I would just,
Because you have to have two
I might go to
different
window settings, and I might
But
change
like
my
instead of
Y
doing mine
min.
all at once, I split mine up.
Actually, that's concave down, so you're gonna have a maximum, so I change my Y max maybe, go down, maybe change that to like a 15, see if that gives it
Since
2.
there is a negative here, you have to divide by once you move that 2.
Hold on a second, dude, hold up.
So that's a 2, right?
That's not an x squared.
No escape.
Remember, a is not -1 squared, a is -1 if you're using the quadratic
Negative 2
formula.
because you have to divide by.
So click on the, that one's good, we're having tree slash edit function, and scroll it to F1. First off,
Yeah, but I was just.
I think it was positive 2, wasn't it?
Because
It's the first one I use.
if it was positive 1, it was.
No. You said it was This one should be factors.
Oh, here's the equation. What is your A? Let's not look at the equation again. Right, that's -1.
Oh, wait,
I made that way far.
But also like the square root, it's okay to have a square root of 2, just remember to use plus or minus.
There's no.
But that's gonna change some small
You
things.
should get rid of the A and
So what's going on?
divide by
We
those.
can't use factor for any of them.
Correct, because for you to have factored form, you need which kind of roots? X-intercepts or real roots. The whole thing is that these are all imaginary roots. Does that make sense?
So does -1 turn into a positive and then divided?
Positive and negative make a negative, right? So we have to use the first one we use first.
Wait, what happened to your 2?
So then that just becomes whatever.
Use a calculator. Like literally, it's in your hands.
I don't know why I did.
Yeah. Don't make it more complicated than that.